The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, hi everyone. It's another week of the Clear Signal. Welcome back to the show. It's great to have you with us. I guess I will apologise right up front for the rather nasally sound of my voice this week. I'm a little bit choked up with a cold, but hey, the show must go on, and we've got a fun show ahead this week too. In fact, we're going to be talking about photography in just a few minutes and how to get the best out of your smartphone with professional photographer Stephen Pam, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. Coming up in the second half, I'm going to have to be on my best behaviour and, in fact, using my best posture. We're going to be talking about chiropractic care. Dr. Karen Dixon is going to join us. She's going to be here in the studio, so I'm going to have to make sure that I'm sitting upright and using the best posture while I'm doing that. And we're going to be talking about some of the principles of chiropractic care and what that might be able to do for you and help you in your day-to-day life. And we're all a bit guilty of having pretty poor posture. I put my hand up right at the start of this, slouching away here in my studio as I'm wont to do. But that's coming up in the second half. First up, smartphone photography. Boy, hasn't technology changed with that form of taking photos these days? Everybody's got a smartphone these days, walking around taking photos all over the place, posting them up on social media. But, like anything, there's a bit of an art to doing it properly, and it's something that I really enjoy doing, and it's all about how you put the photos together in the first place, and there's some tips and tricks to do that better. Stephen Pam is a professional photographer, someone who I've worked with for many, many years on various media projects, and he joins us on the line now. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great to have you with us, mate. I'm really looking forward today to talking about photography. It's one of my little pet subjects, and I actually have you to thank for that because I've sort of become a bit of a closet shutterbug myself over the years, and I think a lot of that's to do with you and I working together on so many projects over the last sort of 15 years. But I guess before we go in and talk about smartphone photography, which is really where we want to point this discussion today, perhaps a bit about your journey through photography and your background.
Of course, no worries. Well, I'm glad to hear that I've hopefully inspired you a little bit, and really, there's no need to be in the closet. I think you can proudly be an amateur photographer.
Yeah.
So I'm a commercial photographer, which I've been doing for basically a quarter of a century now, which always sounds like a long time when I say it. So I've become okay at it, and so commercial photography, which is what I do, means that my customers are businesses, so definitely no weddings for me. Which suits me well because it's generally 9 to 5, and that leaves the weekends free to do other things. So the kinds of things I'm photographing at work are a lot of corporate headshots, so business portraits, if you like. And I also get to go out to industrial sites and things like that. There's a little bit of drone photography. There's corporate videos, and on a really good day, I might find myself hanging out the door of a helicopter photographing Red Bull Air Race pilot Matt Hall doing his thing.
Yeah, well, getting out there and doing aviation photography is always an approved activity on this program. I can tell you that much.
It sure is. That's right. And yeah, in my spare time, I enjoy a bit of film photography. I have a few old film cameras, and in my travels, I like to smash off a roll or two of film and share some of those on Instagram. That's pretty much what I do. People assume that as a photographer, you're creative or artistic, but I actually see myself as more of a craftsman. So I'm interested in the craft of photography. I like the process. And I think this is probably true of a lot of photographers. There's maybe a spectrum of people who consider themselves artists and who just use photography as their chosen tool or their chosen medium. And then there are people who collect cameras and love using cameras. Yep. And then I think most of us probably fall in the middle, and there's an artistic element and a element of just enjoying the process. But I actually like the process of turning the scene in front of me into a pleasing or interesting photograph.
I think the word craft is, I think that's really going to dovetail nicely into what we're going to talk about here, but just touching on perhaps going back a little bit in time, before the smartphone era and perhaps even before the digital era, you mentioned film photography. I think a lot of people might be surprised that you can actually still do that if you want to.
Yeah, people are sometimes surprised. It's definitely making a comeback. Of course, film photography was the only kind of photography up until around around a quarter of a century ago, or 20 years ago, I guess, digital photography really became mainstream. And a lot of us, both professionals and amateurs, were very keen to jump on board with that and take advantage of, all of the benefits that it does offer, like getting your photos straight away and not having to wait a week while you drop them off at the chemist and wait a week and get them back.
Because there was nothing worse than, taking what you thought was 24 fantastic snaps and sending them away and waiting the week, and they'd come back to the chemist and you'd look at it, you'd flip through and think, well, that one's terrible. That's a waste.
Exactly.
I don't like that one.
It definitely, it was a process that definitely had its cons. And so, it kind of got jettisoned by a lot of people, or by most people. And some of us kept shooting and dabbling with film recreationally, including me. But, I'd be lying if I said that I continued to shoot as much film once the digital workflow came in. I was, like everyone, very keen to adopt it. But a lot of young people, including my kids, who are grown-up kids like yours, but a lot of, let's say, Gen Zs, getting into film photography. There's something they like about, I guess, because they always have their smartphones, and that's just kind of a normal process for documenting things, and something feels to them, I guess, a little more creative. Plus, I think there is a genuine sort of magic or alchemy to this idea that you capture the image and it's sort of hiding there in the chemistry in the silver halide crystals, and then magically appears there. There's something kind of enchanting about that process that I think people can still enjoy.
I think we sort of came into the early 2000s. I can still remember getting film processed probably into the early 2000s, but now digital cameras came along. I can remember getting my first one and, the number of pixels it would have had on it wouldn't have been great from memory, but thinking, wow, this is fantastic technology. And then, of course, that was the pre-smartphone era where you could still get, the flip phone sort of came out and they started having cameras on them and you think, whoa, what a novelty that is. But then the iPhone came along and smartphones came along, and it just seemed to change the photography world almost overnight.
Yeah, absolutely. And even now, looking back at those earlier iPhones and smartphones that had cameras that at the time seemed okay, I look at some of my old photos on them and I'm like, oh, they look like they've been taken on a potato. But it definitely did. I mean, that obviously combining that, the fact that you have it with you all the time. And there's an old saying, which I'm afraid I've forgotten who it's attributed to, which is probably bad as a photographer, but the best camera is the one you have with you. And of course, you always have your smartphone with you. So no matter how good your fancy SLR is, if it's at home, it's not the best camera. So
technology seems to have really picked it up. I mean, I've just recently upgraded my smartphone, and the quality of image now that's taking is, the colours I noticed, the range of colours that it can take is just amazing, even compared to the previous one I had, which I would have thought was pretty modern. But, the lenses on those smartphone cameras are still quite small. So when you're considering that versus, say, your average point-and-shoot camera, are there advantages, disadvantages to both?
Yeah, look, there are still differences. As you say, the capability of smartphone cameras now is really, really good. And in most normal conditions, particularly in daylight, they're excellent, and they're essentially as good as the average point-and-shoot camera or better. It's important to kind of not get too distracted or tricked by terminology like, some of these smartphone cameras have, I don't know how many megapixels they are now, probably 50 or something. And there's a little bit of trickery and cheating going on. There's a lot more to image quality than megapixels. However, you can print these photos off smartphones that are taken in daylight. You could print them and hang them on your wall, and they're really good. But as you touched on as well, just because of the size of not so much the lens, but the little sensor that's in there, which is really what's doing the work and capturing the images. The sensor in even the best smartphone camera is, you could sit it on your fingernail. They're really minuscule, whereas in most digital cameras, not so much point and shoots, but once you get up into the more serious mirrorless cameras, they're going to be either the size of for those of us that are old enough to remember what a 35mm slide looks like, or slightly smaller than that. But I guess let's say about the size of an SD card, a memory card. So they're significantly larger, which means they can gather more light, which means particularly in low light situations, that sort of noise and fuzziness you get in the shadows is much less of an issue with cameras. Plus, there's a few other advantages of cameras potentially. Once you get up into the higher end, you can change lenses for different tasks. So I certainly wouldn't recommend anyone that's into bird photography try doing that with their smartphone. Whereas, of course, on a camera, you can choose a suitable long lens to be able to do that. And also, I guess, some of the benefits of the smartphone, like the fact that you always have it with you. For example, if you're traveling, you might want to preserve your phone. You might need your maps and all that sort of thing. So if you're using your camera all day, you might be concerned about running your battery down, or even, depending how old your phone is or how full of photos it is, you might be concerned about filling up the memory. So sometimes there's actually an advantage to not having to pull your phone out all the time because you might be using it for something else.
Yeah.
So.
And I've actually enjoyed, a year or so back, I bought a Lumix camera. I think it's the brand is Panasonic, I think it is. And although it's not a high-end camera, but it's still enough. It's got a bit of a bigger lens on it, and you can actually, once you get the hang of it, take some better photos, compared to what you get on your smartphone. But then again, I suppose it's all in the eye of the beholder too. Somebody that just wants to take a quick snap and put it up there on their social media or whatever, perhaps some of the things that matter to a more hardcore enthusiast may not matter to someone who just wants to get a quick Instagram
Absolutely.
snap up there.
And you've got that convenience of that it is already on your device. So you take a photo with a camera, you've got to, like a lot of them do have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi ways of transferring them to your device and then sharing them on social media, or some even, I think, let you share them directly from the camera. But it's an additional step. So, of course, there's that immediacy of being able to snap something and get it onto Instagram or Facebook or whatever platform straight away. So, one other, advantage of a real camera in inverted commas is they'll have more external controls and more manual controls. So, again, if you're trying to achieve some sort of special effect where you need a bit more control over the shutter speed or the aperture or whatever it is, then you have access to all of that can be a little bit tricky on a smartphone.
Our guest this week is Stephen Pam, a professional photographer and a good friend of mine and someone who's taught me a lot about photography over the years. And Stephen, I suppose one of the things I remember from the first time we worked together, I should, for context, we've done a lot of work in the aviation world doing photography and video work. But I remember back to the first time you and I were working together at an event, and we were doing videography, but the concept is still the same. I don't know really what I expected that day, but the one thing I've noticed about you then and ever since is that you don't stand still. You don't have the camera sitting static. And I guess that comes back to what you were talking about earlier when it comes to talking about the craft of making an image and using whatever device you have to do a good job of it. It's all about the composition.
Absolutely. The composition is probably the most important thing when it comes to any photograph. I used to run photography workshops at schools for kids, and one of the first questions we would always ask, or one of the first topics we would touch on, is what is it you're trying to take a photograph of, or what are you trying to do here? And that sort of might seem obvious to us as grown-ups. Usually you walk up to something and you go, oh, this is interesting, or it's a photo of your cat or your kids or some landscape that you've walked up to, and it's usually obvious what you're taking a photo of, even if you haven't necessarily articulated that out loud. But by thinking about what the clear focus or story is of the photograph, you can then start to eliminate what's not essential. Michelangelo, or was attributed to Michelangelo, reportedly said about his sculpting process, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." So he saw his role as a sculptor as being to remove all the unnecessary material, revealing the form hidden within the marble. And I think as a photographer, your role is a little bit the same, because you know what you're pointing the camera at, you know what you're interested in, but your viewer doesn't necessarily. So I might say, oh, look, my cat's being cute, take a photo of my cat. But I've also included the coffee table, the pot plant, the TV, 5 other things. And when the viewer looks at it, there's all these distractions that are not relevant to what you're trying to tell a story of. So oftentimes, the simplest way to make a photo more effective, well, I say it's simple, but it's not always easy, is to, eliminate what's not essential. So that could be by staying where you are and moving the camera up, down, left, right. It could be by moving closer. It could be by, if your smartphone has, so mine has 3 lenses, a wide one, a normal one, and a telephoto one, or a long one. It might be a case of punching into the longer lens. Or as you said, moving around. So I might just move, 10 centimeters to the left so that that tree's not growing out of your head, or so that that rubbish bin is not behind you. And, that might make a big difference to the photograph. So it's just a case of none of that's rocket science. There's various rules of composition that you can read about, like the rule of thirds and what have you. But I think the most important thing is just to be conscious of it. So just taking that step from, there's something good, click, to there's something good. Well, sure, click first, and then you can, the digital doesn't cost you anything to take another photograph. So snap the first one that you think of first. And then, just what happens if I move left, right, up, down, closer, further, and give you some options.
One of the tricks I really like to do, and I learnt this from you, is moving it down. I like to, instead of holding the phone up right in front of your face like most people are apt to do, if you just move it down a little and point it up, it just gives that kind of perspective to an image. If you're taking, I take a lot of images of my grandkids these days, for example, just by moving the camera down a bit and sort of angling it up, you can get a really good effect on the subject of the photo. And I actually taught this to my sister-in-law recently. She thinks I'm a genius now, but
nice one.
I attribute that to you, my friend.
Feel free to pretend that you've come up with any of these things, which most of them are probably as old as photography themselves. But
it is amazing. It's just little tips like that, as you say, that really work well. You just touched there on the rule of thirds. Now, a lot of people talk about the rule of thirds. Can you just explain to our audience just what that is?
Yeah, look, and I would use the word rule with caution, because it is known as the rule of thirds, but, not to use the cliche that rules are meant to be broken, but I think that photography rules, all should be taken as guidelines. But, this just states that rather than, having your subject right in the middle, as you might be inclined to do, oftentimes if you have the subject off to one side around a third of the way through the image, it can produce a more interesting image. It can also be unsuccessful. Like if I take a photo of you gazing off into the distance and I have you a third of the way through the image and I have you looking off towards the short side of the photograph, that is to say the space in it is behind you, that's going to look pretty odd. Whereas if I have you looking towards the space, that's probably going to look nicer. Having said that, like I say, these rules are meant to be broken, and I find myself often or probably more often, deliberately putting the subject in the middle of the photograph. If you know Wes Anderson films at all, there's this sort of symmetry that he uses in his films, and that's a look that I kind of like. So again, it's not necessarily about that you should use the rule of thirds. It's more about, what if I put the subject off to one side? Do I prefer that, or do I prefer it in the middle? And just see what you like the look of.
Yep. And one other thing too, of course, is, people are using their smartphones a lot, and not only for photography, but, it gets down in your bag or whatever. The lens can actually get quite dirty if it's rolling around in your bag or at work or whatever. So taking a good image, just something as simple as making sure that your lens is clean.
Yeah, definitely. That's one that I see a lot. You see someone's photos on Facebook. Usually it's not my friends, I have to say. It's more like you go on Marketplace and you see something and it's in a sort of a fog. And that's really the main symptom is you get this sort of, it's a bit like looking through a foggy window. So it's not that you can see the actual dirt on the lens usually, but you just, especially if there's any light source in the image, or if you're shooting towards the light, the whole thing, the contrast will go down. And so just usually a bit of a breath and a cotton t-shirt is enough to take care of that. But because you've got your fingers all over your phone, they can easily get greasy.
Well, we talked a lot about things that you can do that you should do in order to make your smartphone photography a bit better. But there's also some things perhaps you should avoid. Apart from having a dirty lens, there's you mentioned lighting there. That's a pretty key one. I see that sometimes with a lot of smartphone photography where it might have been a wonderful photo, but the lighting is just not there. Yeah,
lighting's probably almost equal to composition. I mean, as a photographer, if you're trying to make an interesting photograph, as a sort of day-to-day photographer, I guess, if we're just talking about happy snaps of your family, then lighting would be second to composition, I'd say. And again, there are rules and principles, but there are also times to experiment with breaking them. For example, a lot of us were taught that you should have the light behind you as the photographer, and that can help the camera a little bit, but it won't necessarily help if you're taking a photograph of a person and the sun's right behind you and they're looking into it, that might not necessarily be a flattering picture. So often overcast or shade is good if you're outdoors and you're trying to take a photo of a person. And certainly many smartphones can handle shooting into the light as well. But yeah, indoors is where the lighting, I think, more often trips us up because the quantity of light is a lot lower. We don't tend to notice that when you're not taking photographs because your brain compensates for it and you can see okay, but it really is an order of magnitude less light indoors. So you go, okay, let's go stand under a light, and then you can get some horrible shadows sometimes. So just notice if if the subject is standing under a downlight, that's probably going to cast some nasty shadows in the eye sockets and under the nose. So perhaps get them to stand just in front of it or between two of them. Again, it's all about experimentation and just awareness and experimentation rather than hard and fast rules. So just notice what your lighting's doing.
One of the things we find as cameras get more modern, whether it's a smartphone camera or even your more traditional type, is the level of technology that's in those cameras. Now, there can be a tendency, I think, sometimes for people to over-process the image at the time they're taking it, or even sometimes even in post-production. But would you recommend using a lot of filters, or would you prefer to take more of a raw image and play with it a little bit later?
Yeah, I would probably caution against using too many filters that are baked into the image. That is to say that you can't undo later, because there are so many apps you can get to be able to play with those things afterwards on your phone. And some of those filters certainly are useful. Some people like to really go quite far with processing their images and do crazy things with the sky and colors and all sorts of things. And, if that's your jam, then that's fine. It's probably not my thing, but they're your photos, so do what makes you happy. But to me, the idea of having filters that you can't reverse and you can't revert to the original capture, I would probably avoid that.
Now, Stephen, I want to talk, time's sort of getting a little bit away from us, but before we sort of wrap up here, I want to talk about moving beyond the smartphone. I think smartphones, particularly for young people, I think it's a good way to get people into the art and the craft of photography, but there are better options if you want to go down that rabbit hole, and boy, what a rabbit hole that can be.
It can be a very expensive rabbit hole, maybe not compared to our other hobby of airplanes, but it can still be an expensive rabbit hole for sure. And you can spend as much on a camera and a lens as a car easily. So these days, it's less about brand and more about choosing a system that meets your needs. So, you mentioned point and shoot cameras before. I think with point and shoot cameras, unless it's for a specific purpose like travel, you'll probably run into limitations fairly soon. So if you're wanting to get more serious about your photography, you want something that you can change the lenses on. And most of us have heard of the old style SLR, or now it's called a DSLR, digital SLR, which means single lens reflex. They have a mirror in them that flips up when you take the photograph. And those are kind of moving aside now for the mirrorless camera, which doesn't have a mirror, as the name suggests. And you look through the viewfinder and you're actually looking at a little screen in there, or some of them don't even have a viewfinder. They only have a screen. But they have the advantage of interchangeable lenses. So you can start with the lens that comes with it. And then later, if you want to get into astrophotography or bird photography or airplane photography or whatever it is, you can buy a lens for that. And ultimately, it's the lens that makes the picture. So yeah, I'd say compare the mirrorless systems that are out there and make sure you jump on photography forums or ask friends that have them, what they like, what they don't like. And it's finding that trade-off of something that meets your budget and that has the capabilities you need, and also that's going to be a reasonable size to carry around, again, depending on what you like to do.
I might set a little task for our listeners. Folks, if you'd like to start experimenting with some images, perhaps based on what you've heard here, you can shoot those through to me, Steve at clearsignal.com.au. That's for this Steve, not that Steve, but I'll pass it on to that Steve. And maybe Stephen can have a look at it, and maybe we can come back and revisit this in a few weeks from now and maybe just give some people some pointers based on what we see. That'd be really interesting to see what people can come up with. In the meantime, Stephen, obviously you've got a business that you run. Tell people where they can find you online.
Probably if they just look up my name, which is Stephen Pam, they can find me. That's my tag on my handle on Instagram, and you'll be able to find my business that way as well. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And Stephen, I should say, is all over all forms of social media, but certainly find him on Instagram. There's also another account you've got, I think, called Plane Photographer. Is that right, mate? Yeah, that one I'd say is a little bit stale at the moment. I've not been dabbling with plane photography for a long time. Well, that's just most unacceptable, my friend. We need to change. We need to get back out there. Stephen, so great to catch up with you, my friend. I'd love to have you back on in a few weeks from now. Maybe we'll talk some more about photography.
Pleasure. It's been fun, and enjoy.
And please do take some photos and send them in. Take some of the tips that you found there from Stephen, that talking about different angles and your rule of thirds and things like that. Send them in to us, steve@clearsignal.com.au. Really would love to have a look at them, and if you give me permission, I might even put them up on our social media here just to show off some of the great work that our listeners are doing with their smartphone photography. And one of the other tips there that I didn't mention with Stephen, but something that I like to do is, particularly with digital cameras, take as many shots of your subject as you want. Snap off half a dozen images, because you can always delete the ones that you don't like, and you'll usually find there's a gem in amongst them. So there's a little tip from me as well, just to go with all of that. You're listening to The Clear Signal. We'll be right back after the break, talking all things chiropractic with Dr. Karen Dixon.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
I might have mentioned at the start of the show that I'd be using my very best posture, and I'm a little bit anxious here in the studio now, because sitting across from me is a chiropractor, Dr. Karen Dixon. Hi, Karen. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Steve.
Thanks for joining us today. I thought we'd have a bit of a chat about the chiropractic scene and what it's all about, because I think it's a little bit misunderstood sometimes by some people. So I guess right at the outset, just tell us in a broad sense, what is it a chiropractor do? What is this treatment, and why is it perhaps a bit different from other treatments?
Well, I think chiropractic treatment deals with the spine and the nervous system. So we're trying to optimise spinal function and improve, obviously, the function of the nervous system. So chiropractic treatment is drug-free, and I guess, it's often extremely effective at treating a lot of a broad range of spinal problems.
And is the spinal aspect of it, is that really at the core of it? I suppose it's at the core of our body, isn't it? But, is that the core of it? Are there other parts of the body that you concentrate on, or really, is really that central part of the body where you focus?
I think most chiropractors would focus on the spine itself, but we also do look at peripheral joints as well, so arms, legs, feet, hands, all sorts of things. People will often come in and say they're having a problem with whatever. Can you have a look at this? So, yeah, definitely. We can certainly look at other parts of the body as well.
You hear people around, and there are all sorts of stories that go around about really all sorts of medicine, I suppose, and all sorts of different methods. Now, I've been receiving chiropractic care for probably the better part of 20 years, and I've always found it really, beneficial. Do you find that some people come in and they're a little bit maybe pensive? They don't really know what they're in for. What do you sort of find when people come to you?
Yeah, I suppose for in my clinic, most of the new patients that come into me have been referred by other patients, so they have often been told, this is what happens, and that's what happens. Sometimes they can be a bit nervous, but I find that generally just by explaining exactly what is going to happen and what I'm going to do to them and why, that for most people allays their fears pretty much completely.
And I mean, I can speak from experience. I mean, coming out and getting some sorts of treatments. I remember going in the first time and always having a crook back, and we might talk about the reasons why that sort of stuff happens a little bit further on, but because I rather suspect it's quite common with a lot of people. But I've always found it to be beneficial. Are there different types of chiropractors? Do people have different ways of doing, like different specialities, or is it sort of a similar thing right across the board?
There are a wide range of chiropractic techniques and systems, I suppose, for analysing and treating the spine and the nervous system. All chiropractors are probably what you'd call generalists in terms of we all have the same training and we all can treat patients through their entire lifespans. There are a number of chiropractors that now sort of specialise in treating babies and children. And there are others that deal specifically with more sporting injuries. Yeah, neither of which I do. I don't specialise in either of those. I'm probably more interested in treating older people now.
And how long have you been in the game? How long have you been at this?
I've been practising for 31 years.
31 years, wow.
Yeah, we don't really want to dwell on how long, but yeah, 31 years I've been practising, and a lot of it in Cranbourne, I suppose.
Yeah, and of course, for people for reference, down here in the southeast of Melbourne, that's kind of where we're based in that area. So what attracted you to chiropractic in the first place?
I guess probably the fact that my mum was a migraine sufferer when I was a kid. She would regularly suffer from severe migraines. So when I was quite a small child, which is a long time ago now, she started going to a chiropractor regularly and saw a dramatic decrease in the severity and the frequency of her migraines. So then when I was in my first year at uni, I started a science degree and started getting headaches and back pain myself. She sent me off to see her chiropractor. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a bit interesting. I wonder if I could do that. So then when I finished my science degree, I applied to do chiropractic and went ahead and did the course then. So I think the fact that it was really effective and, it was hands-on treatment, which I think a lot of people like as well. It's not just most chiropractors don't just prescribe exercises. We actually do some hands-on treatment to people. And I think that appealed as well.
Yeah. And as you say, you've been doing it for over 30 years now.
A long time.
Yeah. Now, I happen to know that you've, over the time that you've been involved in chiropractic, you've also been involved a bit in mentoring other people and teaching other people the skills. I mean, what sort of study is required to become a chiropractor?
It's a 6-year full-time undergraduate degree.
So it's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment.
Big commitment.
Yeah. It's a big chunk of your life you spend at uni.
Now, people come into you. I'm just betting that people come to you when it's kind of too late, like, oh, geez, I've got a crook back, or geez, I've got this pain, or migraines, as you mentioned, or things like that. What about the idea of regular tune-ups? Do you think perhaps some of us, maybe the first time when we've been adjusted or whatever the terminology is there, maybe after that we should maybe be a little bit more regular, like seeing any other medical professional for a condition?
Yes, we should, shouldn't we, Steve? Yeah, so I guess often the first time people would come to see me, they're having some pain or some difficulty with something, and once most of that is resolved, we certainly try and encourage them to have some ongoing regular treatment. But some choose to do that and some don't, and some people go on a bit of a cycle of sort of repetitive acute incidents or acute aggravations before they sometimes see the light and decide, well, yeah, having a tune-up now and again is a good idea.
Yeah.
It does tend to prevent a lot of problems, but not always.
I suppose, if you're struggling there, and you're having an issue on one particular part of your body, I suppose getting it tuned up and adjusted and all that would actually help overall in terms of strength and performance and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
For someone in a sporting, I'm sure people come with a lot of sporting injuries, for example, getting all fixed up there and, a little bit of discomfort, even if that's what it is, in the long term, perhaps that really pays off.
It does, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the time people really take their health for granted until something goes wrong, and then it's a real panic to get it fixed, and they want it fixed immediately, and it doesn't always work that way. When a problem's been there for a long time, it often does take a while for it to improve. So sometimes people need to be a little patient, I think.
And do you find, for example, do you work hand in hand with other disciplines, for example, physiotherapy? I know I've had sporting injuries over the time where I've had treatment chiropractic-wise, but also had physio. Do you sort of work hand in hand with other?
I do often refer to physios. I often also refer to myotherapists as well, depending on what I think the person needs. Sometimes podiatrists, and often back to their GPs as well. It just depends on what I think the person would benefit from. But, yeah, definitely. Even dentists. I do refer people back to dentists as well.
No, we can't talk about dentists because, frankly, I'm terrified of dentists. So. But anyway, that's a whole nother – maybe I should have a dentist in here for an interview.
Yeah, that would be interesting too, wouldn't it? See what they've got to say.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with me, Steve Visscher, and my special guest this week is Dr. Karen Dixon. We're talking all things chiropractic. Karen, we touched on a few things in the previous segment there about, things that people come in to see you about and when they should come and see you. What are the most common conditions these days? I have a theory on this, but I just wonder what you think.
Probably neck pain, headaches, lower back pain are still probably the most common ones, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then through the last few years with people having COVID and lots of coughing often causes problems through middle backs and ribs and things. So that's been a bit more prominent recently as well.
The causes, poor posture. I will put my hand up and although I'm trying not to do it today while you're sitting here in front of me. But,
yes, very good.
Poor posture is one thing. I notice from going around day to day, if you went back to, say, public transport is where I always think of it, and go back, let's say 20 years to the pre-iPad era, where everybody would be sitting on the train a little bit more straight back perhaps and looking at the paper. That obviously doesn't happen these days. Everybody is hunched over, it seems to me, and their eyes are glued to an iPhone or an iThing or an Android. That must be, well, I have a theory that it's probably bringing lots of work for chiropractors. Would you say that's a thing?
Oh, it's definitely a cause of a lot of, neck, shoulder, middle back problems for sure. It's not so much that people sit and look at their phones, it's the amount of time they spend in that position. Yeah. Particularly if that's also on the back of going to work and working at a computer and sitting all day looking at a screen as well.
Yeah. Or sitting in a radio studio, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who would do that? I don't know.
I couldn't imagine. But yes, it is a bit of an epidemic these days, and particularly with younger people as well, like younger teenagers, young adults spending many hours looking down at their phones, looking down at laptops, and just trying to, I find it quite frustrating sometimes, trying to convince them that they don't have to check their phone every minute of the day. You can actually put it down or put it away and not look at it. And when you do look at it, lift it up so it's at eye level. Don't look down at it all the time.
I think as time goes on, I think that's just becoming more and more difficult as social media companies and stuff like to just they're very clever the way they just keep people checking back and checking back all the time. I notice it. I notice it
Absolutely.
a lot. One of the things that you touched on also was migraines, which is something I'd not considered. I don't suffer from migraines myself, but how does chiropractic care, how does that work in easing that sort of condition?
Well, I guess for many migraine sufferers, they also suffer from other headaches that they get between their migraines. So the idea with treating particularly the neck is that you're decreasing the amount of irritation, the amount of neural irritation that the neck is sending up into the brain, if you like, which can then, for some people, put them above a threshold, which then causes a migraine.
Right. Okay.
It's not effective for every single migraine sufferer, but most migraine sufferers would see a decent decrease in the frequency and severity of their migraines. Yeah. With regular chiropractic treatment.
I mean, I suppose that's an important point too. I mean, this is one form of therapy and it may not work for everybody. I mean, that's right. Probably one thing. People go, well, I tried that particular doctor and it didn't work for me, but it might be a more multifaceted problem, I suppose.
But often people that say that have had, maybe one treatment here or there and not followed through and not really given it a good go.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work the treatment doesn't work for everybody. And I will often say to people, I'm not sure whether this is going to help you. We'll certainly do a trial of treatment over the next couple of weeks and see how we go. And if you don't feel that you get any benefit from it, that's fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to continue. But a high percentage of people do get benefit.
I think a lot of people would think about chiropractic care and think about it in terms of purely your skeletal system. But I suppose there's the muscular system aspect too. I mean, and the way that all interplays. What role does looking after, stretching and all that sort of stuff play with chiropractic care?
Well, I think stretching is a big part of it. I think I would probably prescribe exercises for probably nearly every patient that would come in to see me for different problems. I find that doing some regular stretching helps improve flexibility and mobility and helps prevent, if you like, the spine from becoming quite so stiff and restricted again. So it often works on an ongoing basis for people to do some regular stretching. It is really, really helpful too. And also just, I suppose, a big part of the treatment too is educating people on how to try and avoid what's causing their problem. So just suggesting other ways of doing things, better ways of sitting, having breaks when you're out in the garden. You don't go out and garden for 6 hours without a break. You need to break it up and go and do something else. So there's a number of different ways of benefiting the treatment or adding to the effectiveness of the treatment, if you like.
Yeah. And regular exercise, I guess, too, is a big thing, isn't it?
I think walking's really underrated as an exercise that people should do every day.
I think a lot of we talk about, particularly down here in Melbourne, where we had a lot of lockdowns, and I know that's going back a couple of years now, but I think a lot of people are still sort of caught in that funk, I think, where I don't think we're as active as we once were. You're looking around my neighbourhood here, I don't notice as many people walking around perhaps as I once did, and I wonder if that's a factor in it, and maybe that's playing into people coming to get all sorts of medical care.
Yeah, I think people have had trouble sort of integrating some regular exercise back into their routines. I think now that everybody's back at work and living a normal life, trying to find the time again, it can be a bit tricky, particularly through the middle of winter when it's dark and cold and it doesn't really encourage you to go and do much, I think.
Certainly not on a day like today as we're recording this interview today.
No.
It was freezing this morning here in
It's
Melbourne.
really cold. Were you out walking this morning, though?
No, but I promise I'll be out walking once we finish this interview.
Yeah, I've walked my little monsters, so.
Yeah.
I always say to people, gosh, if I can find half to 3/4 of an hour a day to walk my dogs, I'm sure you can too, somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to keep fit myself by people, if they look on the Clear Signal website, they'll see I'm a basketball referee, so that's normally how I keep fit. I try to, a man in my 50s running around chasing, 18-year-old basketball players and trying to pretend I'm fit, but it is good. It is good fit. Any sort of exercise is a good thing.
Yeah.
If I was going to be doing some stretching, generally speaking, I did phys ed at high school in the 80s where we were taught that doing things like static stretching up against a wall or doing, touching your toes, is that stuff, is that really old school now thinking, or is that still what people should be looking at?
Yeah, I think that's a bit old school. I usually would start with getting people to do some stretching lying down in a more supported position. So doing some static stretching is good, but also just doing some resistance band stretching and things is really good as well. I don't think it really matters what people do as long as they do it regularly, like any other exercise. But regular stretching is really important for most of us.
Do you see people these days considering this kind of study as a career? Do you think you're still seeing people that are interested in doing it, particularly when you've had quite a history of mentoring people through?
Yeah, I think over the years I have had a few patients that have gone on to study chiropractic, which is interesting because you don't sort of realise what influence you have on young people usually until you hear, they've gone off to study chiropractic or they're applying to study chiropractic. So, I think it is a good career for people. I think you have to be the right sort of person to do it, though.
I think, like anyone, you've got to be a good listener and a good communicator, I suppose, too.
Yeah, being a really good listener is really important, I think, and wanting to help people as well. Yeah. And
interesting you talk about young people too. It must be really rewarding if you've had someone come in, particularly a young person, and now you see them taking up the profession. That must be really satisfying.
It is nice, yeah. You think, gosh, I don't know what I say or what I do, but it's obviously had a positive impact on someone. Yeah. Which is great.
And can you reflect back on, for example, you might have had a mentor yourself back when you were that age and going through, or did you?
No, I didn't. I suppose I didn't when I was at Monash Uni when I was doing science, but later on when I was studying chiropractic, the first chiropractor that I had been to was always really encouraging and would always let me come and observe him. And I think I even worked there over the school holidays and over the uni holidays rather on the reception desk and things. So that was really beneficial. And I know a lot of other chiropractors that do that too, because you like to give back and you like to encourage and hope that, you make a difference to the profession as well.
Yeah, the profession. And it's also being part of the community and providing a service to the community. And I think I think we've all seen that, haven't we, in recent years, where that's just become so important, or it's really highlighted how important providing services like this is in any community, really.
I think so, yeah.
Karen, obviously chiropractors have their, obviously an association. Can you tell us where people would find that if they're interested and they want to find a chiropractor and have a chat?
Yeah, sure. If you go to the Australian Chiropractors Association website, which I think is chiropractors.org.au, there is a section there where you can find a chiropractor. So I think you type in what suburb you're in or what area you're in, and it will come up with a list of ACA member chiropractors, and that's always a good starting point if people are interested in finding someone.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Karen Dixon, I'm glad you came in and had a chat with us today. It's been fascinating, and I promise as soon as we've finished recording this interview, I'm going to get out and have a nice long walk, I promise, and I'll sit up.
Very good. Pleased to hear it. Thanks, Steve.
What a fascinating show it's been. And I should point out there with Dr. Karen Dixon too that, the opinions and thoughts that she's expressing there are hers, and they don't in any way represent any of the organisations for which she might be affiliated. And I suppose, as with all things, you should do your research and make sure you consult widely when you're getting any medical treatment, and I'm sure she would agree with that too. Thanks also to Steve and Pam for joining us, talking about getting in touch with us. How about grabbing some photos, taking some of the advice we picked up there from Stephen as we spoke to him earlier in the show, and grab some great shots on your iPhone or your Android or, you know what, even your traditional camera. It would be really interesting to see some of the work that people do. It really is an art form, and I think once you start looking into how to really compose a shot properly, you can really have some great fun with it. So I would really encourage people to get in and get involved with that. In the meantime, though, that's everything we have for you on this week's edition of The Clear Signal. We'll be back in a week's time with some more fun and some more great guests. But until then, have fun, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.